What's going on, everyone? Welcome back to the Josh Button podcast. Today, I am joined by Dr. Evan Kappler. We have a lot in common, sir. I've followed your Instagram, looked at your content real good. You dropped some gems in there. You can tell you've been on the mats. You can tell you've dealt with this stuff firsthand. You've got, I'm sure, a lot of success stories. I've seen a few of them. But I'm going to talk to you today about these midlife guys that are out here trying to stay on the mats and what specifically we can do to do that.
Yeah.
Evan, first, where do you train? What belt are you? How long you been in jiu-jitsu? And, give me a little background on that.
Yeah. So I train at South Boston Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. I've been training in total for about 6 years. I'm a blue belt. I played basketball growing up. I picked up jiu-jitsu when I was in graduate school. And yeah, it's been awesome, man. Jiu-jitsu has added a lot of good to my life. It's allowed me to do a lot of things outside of jiu-jitsu that I didn't think I was going to be able to do. But I've been a physical therapist since 2020. I have a doctorate degree in physical therapy. Anybody listening who's been to physical therapy before, I used to do very traditional. You come in, you have a table, we measure your joints, we look at your strength, we do some soft tissue work, we get out in the gym and do some stuff. For the last 2.5 years now, I've really transitioned into what you see on my Instagram today, which is essentially everything's remote. Analyzing movement, looking at deficits, needs, and then ultimately providing programming, coaching support in that sort of thing.
Right. 2020 was an interesting time to start anything, no?
Yeah, man, that was a wild time I was right when I graduated physical therapy school and COVID hit, right when people were looking for jobs and stuff like that. So that was a pretty wild time to get started. Yeah.
Are you born and raised in Boston?
I was born in Boston. I grew up in Rhode Island, and then I went to physical therapy school. Mass General Hospital has what's called the Institute of Health Professions. So they do physical therapy, nursing, occupational therapy, things like that. But I'm a New Englander for sure.
Yeah. So what actually got you into the gym the first day? What made you want to do jiu-jitsu and how'd that start?
So actually, funny story. My brother's 3 years younger than me. He got into it probably maybe 6 months before me. And then I actually went down to Rhode Island. My family's in Rhode Island, and I trained with him. And the instructor at the gym down there, Elevate Judo and Jiu-Jitsu, if anyone's down, Southern Rhode Island area, great gym. He gave me a gi. I did like a whole week. He let me come to class and try it out. At the end of the week, I tried to give him the gi back. I said, "Yeah, this was cool, but I don't really think this is someone's gonna fit into my life. Like I'm busy. I'm in school, whatever." And he said, "Keep the gi. You'll need it where you're going." And then I go back to Boston, and I got this gi sitting in my closet, right? And keep looking at it. I'm looking at it every day, and I'm like, I gotta go try this. So I started looking at gyms in Boston, and some time off for different things on the way, but I've never stopped training since then.
Awesome. So you actually encountered an injury of your own was it on the mats that you got that?
Yeah. A couple, I feel like one of the things that I'm able to kind of work with people, we talked before we started recording about, middle age, right? I'm 30, right? I think you're late 40s.
Yeah, exactly.
I feel like one thing that's been very helpful is like I've just had a lot of injuries for 30 years old, right? Going back to high school, I had a stress fracture in my foot. I played basketball. That led to some knee issues in college. And then probably 3.5 years ago now, I herniated 2 discs in my lower back. And that, if anybody's listening to this and has experienced that type of an injury, that pain can be so severe. You start to really rethink everything. And I went and saw a neurosurgeon, and the guy was young, and he was like, "Dude, you got 2 massive herniated discs. We could absolutely do surgery on this." I opted not to do that. I opted to take care of it myself. And that journey back to jujitsu, right? That took probably 8 or 9 months before I even got back to the mats, right? And this was like, my wife always tells me I don't sell how much pain I was in enough because I don't really like talking about it and saying it. But like I was eating food lying down on my stomach on a yoga mat, like just eating out of the plate like a dog for months. It was super painful. I didn't think I'd go back to jujitsu, right? Like the idea of, compression, flexion, all the stuff on your spine in jujitsu, I thought I might just give it up. But I started to kind of realize like jujitsu had given me a lot. And if I could get back to jujitsu and make that something I was able to continue with, I thought that could continue to propel me forward getting back into jujitsu, right, is right around the same time I started my business, the Instagram page, and everything that I do today. So that was definitely a very pivotal time for me in terms of getting back to jujitsu and getting to where I'm at today. Injury itself, right? Like, how did it happen? People always ask that because it's like, people who are new to jujitsu will hear that and be like, oh, I don't want that. Right. It's not really entirely a jujitsu injury, right? It's probably more a result of a combination of factors from me thinking I'm Superman and can lift weights and go to jujitsu and do all the stuff and not recover and then, do all those things. That's realistically more so what happened. And I had a history with my back. I remember back in, probably when I was like 19 or 20, pulling a deadlift and just feeling that kind of snap in your lower back. So it was definitely something that I had a history with as well.
Yeah, I have a little experience with the back issues as well, but you know what? It was never jujitsu. It was always something off the mats and something that we would think of as just a weird accident or a freak accident. You turn the wrong way, you cough, and you just find something pop up. So with that said, do you think, I mean, bravo for avoiding the surgery, but do you think that there's a lot of unnecessary surgeries out there with this?
Yeah, I mean, I know what I know, right? And my background is physical therapy. So I have to say I'm probably somewhat biased towards like taking care of things without surgery, right? But I do think at the same time, if you look at like an orthopedic, that's what they do. They make money off of doing surgeries, right? So if you come in and you have an MRI that shows X level of damage, it's like, okay, that's enough to move the needle towards like, yes, this is a good surgical option. And not necessarily super incentivized to tell you to go take care of it conservatively and work on it. But I do think, man, a lot of these things, it is your best option. I tell people that a lot, right? People will say, I'm going to do either surgery, stem cells, all these things that we're doing are helpful, but like your ultimate path out of this, especially if you're young and you want to be active for a long time, you have to learn how to take care of these things. And we use the disc injury as an example, because I do think it's something I see a lot in jujitsu. But if you have a disc injury in your lower back, right, and let's say you get the surgery, the first level of surgery is a laminectomy, where they carve the backside of your spine out. They free up the pressure on that nerve pretty quickly. If you did have those radiating symptoms down your leg, that goes away pretty quickly. But fundamentally, they did carve the backside of your spine open. You have a lingering instability that you have to solve for, right? If you go down to Mexico and you get the stem cells, you get the nutrition that a disc needs to heal, but you still have to learn, how do you take care of that thing? What's the 15 minutes you need to do to get your back in a good position before you go train jujitsu? If you're going to work out 3 days a week, what does that need to look like? You have to learn all of those things. And to me, you can just go ahead and learn all those things and you're going to get all the benefit, right? You don't really need the surgery. If there's a guy I really like, Dr. Stuart McGill. This guy's like the godfather of lower back injuries, if anybody hasn't heard of him, but he talks about, it's imagining, right? Let's imagine you just had the surgery 15 minutes ago. What would you do from there moving forward, right? And most of the time, if you just did that, you'd end up in the same spot in 9 months than if you actually got the surgery and then went through all the work anyways. So I do think, a lot of these serious injuries, rotator cuff tears, disc injuries, they really can heal on their own. It's just people have to adjust their expectations for what they're doing and how long it's going to take. And a
Right.
lot of people don't want to do that.
Yeah, I came across a similar situation in New York well before jujitsu. Kind of mangled my shoulder skateboarding, and I had good contacts who hooked me up with the Nick's doctor, and he
Nice.
was an orthopedic surgeon as well. And he looked at me and he was like, "Brother, you're not going to be a professional athlete. You know, like for me to go in and do this surgery is, I can do it. But to be quite honest, if you just go and do the proper rehab and you strengthen it yourself, it'll heal with a little extra calcium in there, and you'll be good to go." So I took that approach as well, and fortunately, I didn't spend the money, didn't have to go through the surgery, and wondered from then forward, is this like, do all doctors offer this advice, and do they offer you both? And I think maybe at the time the relationship I had kind of served me well, but I've
Yeah.
seen it. I've seen it a lot more lately. There's a little bit of awareness where there's more people that are open to going the traditional route, so to speak, rather than under the knife right away.
Yeah, I think in the last, 20 years or so, you've really started to seen that change, right? Like I always use the example, like my dad, right? My dad's pushing 70. Like, I think there's a different mindset. Like he wants the shot, the injection, the thing that fixes it quick. I think people don't want that anymore, right? Because people have seen that in themselves or their parents or whoever it is. People really understand that, like, yeah, there's a knowledge piece here. Like your shoulder, great experience that that doctor said that, right? Because a lot of people get the surgery and then they look back in a year and they're like, I don't really know if this helped me all that much compared, because when you have surgery, right, that's a trauma. You have to recover just from the surgery alone, right? Not just the, the rotator cuff, whatever you had going on in the shoulder. You got to recover from somebody cutting into your shoulder and all the tissue in there and all that stuff. So yeah, I think a lot more people are kind of waking up to that being a better solution. And particularly people who train jujitsu, I think are really seeing that, because you're already getting someone who's probably not looking for the easy way out, right? Probably someone who's pretty committed for the long term. So it definitely goes hand in hand.
It's funny you mentioned that because actually my father did something similar to his collarbone, had the surgery, but then didn't go through the rehab properly. And the issues that he's faced from it, from that, the soreness, sleeping, the lack of movement, all of these things,
Yeah.
it's mind boggling.
Yeah. My dad did. He did double knee replacements. Got one, and then 3 months later got the other. And man, watch him when he tries to get into the car. He's got to like pull his leg in, and he didn't really fully do the PT. But yeah, it's just funny. Like he says he's doing way better. So he must have been in a lot of pain before, because it doesn't look pretty.
So are we kind of, I don't know, breaking generational trauma in a different way? Because literally this podcast was started because of my lifestyle choices, trying to avoid the outcomes that my father had. And I'm not even just the surgery, I'm talking about pharmaceutical intervention that led to dependency and other pharmaceutical interventions over and over again. And that was kind of the cascading events that I watched through from the time I was early teens until, 30 or something. I decided that was not going to happen for me. But we're talking about this as physical therapy as well.
I think it's across the board, right? Like I think even if you look, I think professional sports are a good example where you start to look at like, man, a physical therapist or a strength and conditioning coach for an NFL or an NBA team in the 90s didn't exist, right? Like it's a new profession, you know what I mean? And jujitsu is an interesting one where like I think it's a little bit more involved in some of the like even judo, even some of the sports that the combat sports that have like an Olympic level group, right? Like jujitsu doesn't really have that. It's most of the time just a bunch of guys who like to train jujitsu. But yeah, I think you start to see more and more people seeking out physical therapy, strength and conditioning, all that kind of stuff. The entire, 1980s up until today, like professional athletes back then, like, yeah, I'm a Celtics fan. I live in Boston, right? Larry Bird was drinking Miller Lights at halftime, right? Like that doesn't happen today. Like if you're a high level athlete today, you're doing everything you can to look at what you're taking in, what you're doing, your sleep, recovery. That wasn't happening 30 years ago, right? It was just accepted that you were going to push through and get what you could out of it. So I think there's been an entire revolution in the last 30 years just in terms of like how we look at that stuff, and you see it. You're in your late 40s, you see people in their 50s who are still swinging kettlebells, doing jujitsu and MMA and all this stuff. That didn't exist 30 years ago. So yeah, I think it's, across the board, physical therapy, pharmaceutical, all that stuff.
All right. So with that said, we'll go ahead and move into what is also happening and what is different in that last 30 years. And that's these jujitsu guys that hit my age, hit 40, 45, and well, even younger now, are immediately outsourcing to TRT or
Yeah.
going for stem cells when they do have these chronic injuries. And they're kind of taking a new approach that, from my experience, doesn't have long-term science on its side yet. Maybe it will, maybe it won't. That's to be determined. But do you see this as well? Do you think this is an issue? Is this something that we should like ponder a little more carefully, or is this something we should jump into?
Yeah, I mean, again, not an expert on TRT or like, any of those supplements or what they do. Like that's not really my thing, right? But I do think from my own experience, like talking to people who have injuries, right? Like what are you working on? You do hear a lot of like, I'm saving up for Jesus, stem cells. I'm saving up for stem cells. I'm going to start TRT, and it's kind of like you're right, right? Like that probably shouldn't be the first line of defense. If you added that into the routine of somebody who's really dialed in, you talk about the grounding and the cold plunge and the diet. For somebody like that, yeah, maybe that's the next piece that really takes you over the next level. But like if you're not sleeping well, if your diet is garbage and you go to jiu-jitsu 4 times a week, right? And you're just gonna add, TRT, or you're gonna add in some of this other stuff, it doesn't really make sense, right? First off, you have a lot of options that are free that can help you to do all those things. Second off, if it's because of like a specific pain or injury and you're looking for stem cells, I talk about this a lot, but I think the biggest problem I see in people who train jujitsu and have injuries is like everybody has a very specific problem. Right? Like your shoulder, there's something specific going on in there. If you had an MRI, you'd get very detailed information. And I'm sure if we get into it, you could tell me, like, yeah, this hurts, this hurts, this hurts. This generally feels good. This actually makes it feel better. You're giving me data, right? You're giving me inputs. And most people are taking that and they're taking a very general approach to fixing it. Right. I'm stretching more. I'm taking on yoga once a week. Generally good ideas, right? But not necessarily specific to the problem that you have. And I would say, adding in TRT is generally good for you, but it's not specific to the problem that you have. There's very specific solutions. My back injury, I did the same 4 exercises, 6 exercises, sometimes 3 times a day for 6, 7, 8 months. It was a very specific input that I needed at that area at that period in time. Right. So I think that, if there's one thing that I think people should know more, it's like this stuff does work and it's available, and it's basically just exercise and doing the work that you need over a long period of time and being consistent with that work that moves the needle in a huge way.
Yeah, which is exactly why you're here, sir.
Yeah.
So, with that said, you're doing an assessment. You're looking at an athlete who's come to you, midlife jujitsu guy, somebody else who in combat sports who is dealing with this nagging, whatever, shoulder, neck, back. You're addressing the fundamental and root cause. How? So you're looking at their mobility, you're looking at their posture, you're listening to this, like you said, feedback and this data that they're giving you, and then you're building a plan to specifically address that underlying condition, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
walk me through it.
Yeah, good question. So one of the first things that is probably easier to use an example, right? But let's use a back injury, right? And maybe before we even get into that, so a big concept there in terms of like we use that on social media. Get to the root cause, fix the root cause. We'll talk about mobility and stability, right? Like I think I harp on stretching a lot. Everybody thinks like I need to stretch more, and it's not always the correct solution, right? If you have a disc injury or your shoulder, you were never going to just stretch away that shoulder pain. I was never going to stretch my back and get rid of the back pain. And the way that works, the different joints of your body. So if we're thinking ankle, knee, hip, lumbar spine, thoracic spine, and then off your thoracic spine, your upper back, you have your shoulders and your neck, right? All of those joints have certain inputs that they rely on. If we bend over to pick something up off the floor, we want to move back into our hips. We want to stay stable through our lower back. Okay, and the way that pattern works, right? If the ankles need to be adequately mobile, knees stable, hips mobile, lumbar spine stable, upper back mobility, and then coming off your upper back, your shoulders and your neck are going to thrive off of stability. Okay, and when I say thrive off of, what I mean is that the input that I'm going to hit that area with in rehab in the gym is going to be oriented towards creating more stability or mobility in that area of your body. Right. So the best example of this is the hip and the shoulder. The hip, they're both ball and socket joints. It's a ball inside of a socket, right? The hip sits inside a deep socket. It has a lot of structure. It's pretty stable. You don't typically see young people dislocate their hips. If you do, it's a football injury or a car accident. It takes a lot of force, right? The shoulder works the other way around. The shoulder sits like a golf ball on top of a tee. It's a very shallow socket in a larger ball. Okay, so most people can swing their arm, 360, right? The shoulder thrives off of stability. The rotator cuff comes up from that socket like a pair of tentacles. It's 4 muscles. They come up like this. They hold onto that ball and they maintain position, right? If you've ever seen like a Turkish get up, that's a perfect example of stability at the shoulder joint. Okay, so there's very specific inputs. Shoulder dislocations, they happen super commonly. Jiu-jitsu, you see it in all sports. You see it in kids who play baseball, swimmers, basketball. You see shoulder dislocations very commonly. Different inputs at different parts of your body. So a lot of times I'll see somebody with, let's say, a back injury, right? I have back pain. I have radiating symptoms down into my glute. My back feels tight. It's wicked tight. I need to stretch it, right? One of the first things I'll have them do is I'll have them sit up straight I have a chair with wheels on it, so it doesn't quite work. Put their arms across their chest and just rotate, right? And just see how far they can rotate. Really, I'm looking a little bit more at your upper back, but I'm certainly capturing your lumbar spine as well. 9 times out of 10, somebody who says my back is tight, right? I need mobility, I need to stretch. When you watch them move, they get to 90 degrees, no problem, right? If I'm looking at the line across my shoulders, I generally want to see you can get 45 degrees in each direction, optimally as close to 90 degrees. So right there, if you're moving to 90 degrees and you feel tight, the problem isn't tightness in the sense of you need to stretch, you need to work on flexibility, right? Flexibility or stretching is just taking the origin and insertion of a muscle where it attaches on both ends and pulling it away from each other, right? But if you move well, if you move through a full range of motion and you're feeling tight, then that tightness is happening for a different reason. It's either a weakness in that muscle or a weakness in a neighboring muscle, right? In the case of a lower back, if your lower back muscles feel tight, it's probably your core and your glutes are not doing the work that they should. Your lower back is tight because it's protecting you all day, right? And it's holding on. And it's just trying to make sure that you're in a good position. You get your core firing, you get your glutes firing, the tightness in your back goes away. You stretch the lower back, and you're probably just moving through your spine a ton and exacerbating the issue. People get stuck in that cycle for years,
Yeah.
right? They try to stretch away the back pain, and they're just making it worse the whole time, right? So that's probably one of the first levers we're looking at in terms of like, what is the root cause and how do we most effectively resolve it?
Now, when you sat there and moved in that chair, you did not move like most of the 40-year-old jujitsu guys. Have you noticed?
I have very good so I'm a good example of that, right? On the spectrum of let's think about mobility and stability. On the far end of stability, you have a power lifter. Everything that they do is oriented around creating tightness. And then the other end of mobility, you have a yogi, right? Everything they do is oriented around being as flexible as possible. There's a spectrum in there, and everybody exists along that spectrum. I'm on the far end of that spectrum, right? Like I'm very flexible, right? It's not a surprise that I end up with a lower back injury. I can move well. I need stability. And some people are the opposite, right? I see people who are my age that they can't get to 45 degrees in each direction, right? They need mobility. But honing that in is really important because what works for me might not work for you. I don't really need to stretch all that much. There's these little exercises I'll do to get my core firing that just make me feel 10 times better, right? But for you, you may not move very well. And we may say, Josh, you need to actually work on opening up your upper back because it's putting your neck, your shoulders, and your lower back in a worse position. Right. So it's very person to person, but I don't necessarily think that correlates entirely to age. Like I'll see people who are 45, they're moving fully 90 degrees in each direction, but they feel tight. Right. So that's one of the big things in terms of like dialing in what the problem is.
I think you nailed my assessment without actually trying to nail my assessment, my personal assessment.
You think?
Yeah, upper thoracic. But with that said as well, most of the guys in my age range who I'm thinking of are also guys that have been on the mats for a really long time. One of the things that you'll notice is what we call the Batman neck. And,
Yeah, yeah,
when you start to see those guys that a lot of the time, sometimes I'm loose, sometimes I feel good, but for a lot of the time, I'm not even thinking about it. And I'm kind of protecting myself in that way when I look over at somebody or I feel like, okay, I'm moving a little bit tight or I see it on camera. And I'm like, that's a little bit of the Batman neck, but I'm stable.
yeah,
And
yeah,
I've worked on the balance and stability stuff a ton. Like I used to do surf workouts on balance boards, and then I moved to slack lines and all of that stuff. So my balance is good. My flexibility in certain positions is outstanding for range of motion. I play rubber guard and Williams guard and all these different things where you're thinking, all right, it takes flexibility for sure, but also in this area of my body, I'm working on bands. I'm working on different ways to kind of restore that. And I don't know if it's a fascia related issue or if it's overtraining without, the compensatory training that I needed to be doing or the balancing, I guess. But yeah, I think you look around the room from 35 to 45 years old and you're going to see one of those issues on the
yeah,
end of the spectrum for sure across the board.
yeah, yeah. The Batman neck is a good example, right? Because it's essentially, you think about literally what's happening there. It's an inability to isolate between your neck and your upper back and your neck, sort of like move together, right?
Yeah.
So the inputs there Like if you're listening to this and you're like, oh yeah, I do that, right? You need stability at your neck. You do still need stability at your neck. That's an important part of that movement. But your upper back, that thoracic region, you need to teach it to move, right? To actually rotation is huge for that, right? Your body, and this is kind of another overarching principle, but your body is designed to move in three planes of motion, right? We move front to back, we move side to side, and then we rotate. Jiu-jitsu is all those things all at once, up, down, inside, out. If you've never seen rotation, if you go into the gym and you move up and down and you move front to back, but you never twisted, you never rotated, you never moved in a lateral plane, you're not really setting yourself up for success with the expectation in jiu-jitsu being that you can do all of those things. Right, so that's usually low hanging fruit, especially upper body, thoracic, like, do some rotation, right? That generally will start to move the needle there.
Yeah, you find guys who, I guess, have tailored their game to their strengths, and then they set in with that intention every round and every day when they train. So we really do kind of build extra. I don't even want to call it tightness, but extra lack of a range of motion. We're not focusing on opening things up, especially at 45. If you're a guard player or if you're a top passer.
Yeah,
So
especially, I mean, that's the defensive posture, right? Defensive posture in jiu-jitsu is bad real life posture, right? So those things kinda go against each other a little bit, and you have to actually, like, actively work against that. Especially if you're driving to work, you're sitting at a computer all day like most people are, right? You're looking at 10, 12, 14 hours a day in this position, right? So, yeah.
so what else do we get wrong? Jiu-jitsu in general. If you've been in the room, you've seen the warm-ups, you've done the drilling, you've gotten the rolls on. You see the guys that are my age that come in, skip the warm-ups or show up when they're ready to roll and just get right into it. What all are you noticing that we as a whole, a community, can improve upon that'll keep us on the mats and facilitate, being healthy?
Yeah, I think one of the big ones, and this is one of the probably biggest pieces of feedback I get when somebody first starts working with me is like, A, I feel better, but B, the workouts are easy. Right. I think a lot of times, like the person who is drawn to jujitsu is oftentimes a person who's seeking intensity. Like if you just wanted to be healthy and have healthy joints and move well, you don't need to do jujitsu. You're doing jujitsu for a reason. A lot of times it's that level of intensity and engagement. That's the thing that you like. When you step out of jujitsu and you start to add in high intensity workouts, CrossFit, anything that you try to recreate that. Right. And I think that's a mismatch. Like if the priority is really jujitsu, everything you do off the mat should be tailored towards supporting that work. Right. A lot of times we take jujitsu and then we essentially pick up another sport. I'm going to do jujitsu and powerlifting, jujitsu and Olympic weightlifting. Right. You're just a two sport athlete. Right. You don't actually have something that is designed to add value to jujitsu, right? To the way that you move and feel. And there's a couple pieces to that, right? Like definitely the planes of motion one, right? Most of the stuff we do in the gym is, powerlifting is up and down, front to back. It's all sagittal plane motion. You have to have something that's actually tailored towards your jujitsu and tailored towards the expectations of what you're going to do on the mat. So that would probably be like the number one thing is like you don't need to recreate jujitsu. You don't need to recreate rounds and intensity and shrimping with weights and bridging with medicine balls. Like that's not what this is, right? It's building capacity. And then I think that the second piece of that is like the expectation of what it takes. Right. And again, people push intensity, right? It's consistency. You could literally just, if you train jujitsu 4 or 5 times a week and you did two 45-minute workouts outside of that, and that was it, and you were consistent with that week over week, right? That's 104 workouts a year if you were consistent, right? And you built week to week off of that same thing. That's going to beat 4 workouts a week. And then the next week you have a shoulder injury, you take it off. And then the next week you do 3, the next week you do 1, right? That consistency piece is what really moves the needle. So I would say the expectations around intensity and consistency is probably one of the bigger things.
100%. I talk about it all the time. Like I've seen so many guys come in, start out hot, come in hot, and then disappear. And then they'll come back and everything that they thought they had gained is gone, or they're now comparing themselves against people that were consistent and they're really just taking a ego blow.
It sucks too, man, because like man, like that those guys got into jujitsu for a reason, right? And then they went too hard. And then I think jujitsu in general, I think we lose too many people. Like, I think there's a lot of people, and I've trained in different environments. I've trained in more intense gyms where we're really pushing the pace and it's hard training. And I've trained in gyms that are a little bit different, right? It's a little bit slower. It's a little bit more, fundamentals class. But like, I think jujitsu loses too many people. Like, I think it's an amazing thing for people, and people have this expectation I need to be strong and fit and capable. And like, yeah, maybe if you wanna go 110% every day, you need a good physical background, but if to be able to go into a gym and participate and learn jujitsu, everybody should be able to do that and find something that's consistent and that they can sustain long term. And I think we lose too many people with that first 6 months. I started having back pain, and then I fell behind my peers, and then I wasn't motivated, and then I just stopped. Right? Like, I think that's something that is a problem that we need to kind of solve a little bit better, and that's a lot of people that I work with, to be honest.
Yeah, and it's one of the reasons that this podcast is dedicated to what it is. It's because I've seen so many people that were really good at jujitsu or really strong and could have been good at jujitsu or had all the attributes that would make a really good practitioner, but couldn't stay on the mats. And
Yeah,
I think that that's one of the things that I was very fortunate to have found before jujitsu was routines and things structure that kind of supported actually getting in there and staying on the mats.
yeah,
Not to mention, I started a little bit older and I knew after a very short time span, I couldn't keep up with the 20-year-olds. And if I tried to
yeah,
train like the 20-year-olds, I was going to do more damage than I would good. So you start to implement these things as self-preservation. And then you realize not only are they self-preservation techniques, but they're also techniques that just stay in jujitsu, which is, if you love it, what you want to do anyways.
yeah,
So
yeah.
yeah, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I was going to say, what else do you recommend for these guys who are coming to you? I mean, they've been in jujitsu for a year, 6 months, a year, and you give them a good workout, a good foundation. You believe that they're going to be consistent. You think they will have success. How do you go above and beyond that? What else do you offer them? What else do you tell them to start to kind of put into their thought process or their routines or their lifestyle?
Yeah. Yeah, man, I'll be honest, I listened to a couple of your podcasts this morning, and you had that one you did on, how I train twice a day at 47. You walked through, like, the morning, the midday, the night, like, kinda what you do. My primary focus is, like, muscles and joints fixing things, right? So, like, I played around with, like, nutrition and stuff like that, but is not my expertise. That's not really something that I get into, but I do think the one piece that kind of is the next level from physical therapy and injuries and thing like that is sort of the way I approach this stuff, right? If you step back, if you've been to physical therapy before,
No, as a personal trainer for a few years, but I honestly, yeah, I got lucky and found people that were much smarter than me and just kind
yeah.
of adapted their philosophies.
Yeah, so I mean, I fundamentally have kind of changed the way that I do things, right? But traditionally, you kind of have physical therapy, you lie down on the table, you do some stuff, and then you kind of have like, personal training, strength and conditioning, right? All of my clients from week one are doing full body workouts, right? On top of very specific inputs that I need to fix specific things, right? And I think that's really important because the way jujitsu works, if you played a sport in high school, you probably had, like, if you wrestled, you played football, whatever it is, you had an in season, right? You had the fall where it was football season, then you had an off season, right? And jujitsu doesn't work like that. Most people train 3, 4, 5 times a week, pretty much year round, right? So within the course of the week, there's a need for like the higher level, performance related stuff, the heavy lifting, the sprints, the power work, but there's also a need for this lower level stuff, right? The stuff that gets your glutes firing appropriately, right? That teaches you how to move in a rotational pattern, whatever it is. All of these things kind of have to blend together, right? So one thing that's really cool about the work that I do is if I work with somebody for 6 months, right? The first month might look very elementary, right? There's still going to be full body workouts, but over the course of 6 months, it really starts to grow. And by the end of it, we're essentially doing strength and conditioning, very specific, physical recovery related inputs for certain injuries. I think that's a really important piece of this. If I just did physical therapy, rehab, it wouldn't move the needle nearly as much as it does. Because if I have somebody who's actually lifting weights twice a week for 6 months, odds are they probably got 30 to 40% stronger in all their lifts over the course of 6 months. And that builds a foundation. right? The way I always explain this, but if you think about an x-axis and a y-axis, right? Jiu-jitsu is a y-axis activity. The only way you're going to get better at it is to train more. No one's ever gotten around that. Your x-axis is all these other things, right? Your strength, your mobility, your cardio, your flexibility, your sleep, your recovery, all these things add value to your ability to go and train jiu-jitsu. And if you start to think about construction, small foundation, you can't build that high, right? If you have a broad foundation, and this is what a lot of these guys are missing who pick up jujitsu for 6 months, get hurt, and then never come back. They never built the X axis, right? They just pushed the Y axis for 6 months until the point that it overflowed, and then they never came back. You have to build that X axis out. Right. So setting people up for success in that way, I just think moves the needle much further than just resolving an injury. Now you're actually building a foundation that you can continue to build off.
Absolutely. So I guess, do you offer people a nutritionist or other resources to go into to help them sustain what you're doing, like on the side of that?
I do have a couple people that I recommend for nutrition and things like that. I prefer to outsource it. I mean, I have like things that I do for myself, but I find if I'm trying to fix back pain, I want to focus my time and energy on fixing back pain.
Of course.
Yes, there's nutritional things that will help. Somebody asks me, I'll make recommendations. I'll tell them about what I do. But am I providing any type of like diet plan, something like that? No, I'm focusing on fixing the injury, the thing that you came in to see me for.
Of
Right.
course. Do you ask them about that in your initial questionnaire or anything? Do you ask them how their hydration is, what they're putting into that, like water wise?
Not a whole ton, to be honest with you. I pretty much just focus on the injury mechanically, what's going on in there, the muscles, the joints, and how we need to solve that issue specifically. I find that tends to take care of about 80-90% of it. And then I do have some people I've worked with for a longer period of time where we've started to add in different things that start to address that. But again, my bread and butter is physical therapy, strength and conditioning, right? I don't have a background or an experience with nutrition or anything like that. So I don't do a whole ton of.
Do you think chronic dehydration plays any role in any of these injuries on their, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think it absolutely does. And you talked about foam rolling, right? I think those two go hand in hand, like hydration, foam rolling, looking at like the quality of your tissue, right? How prepared, and this goes into the category of like things that are generally good, right? Hydration, foam rolling, making sure those tissues are ready to absorb force, to transmit force, whatever it is that we're trying to do. So, yeah, I mean, I absolutely do think those things are a factor. I think if you're in that, kind of, red light zone where like you really have an injury that's in a lot of pain, I think focusing on specific inputs for that area are going to move the needle much further. But yes, basic hydration, foam rolling is definitely something that I do. That's definitely a part of the equation.
What do you say to the athletes that have been advised not to do jujitsu anymore for similar issues to what you went through?
Yeah, that's a good one. I mean, that's something I hear all the time, right? I went to my doctor. My doctor said, stop doing jujitsu. Right. And it's kind of like, on one hand, you hear that and you're like, well, that's messed up. You should be able to do jujitsu. There should be a way that you can do that. But if you think about it on another side, a doctor probably has 15 minutes to talk to you, right? And he's looking at your imaging and he's saying, like, your neck's jacked up, your shoulders jacked up, like, probably don't need to do jujitsu. That handles his 15 minutes and then he moves on. Right. I think there's a couple levels to that, right? But number one, is that doctor really set up to go through the things you need to do to get you back to doing jujitsu successfully? Probably not. Right. And then number two, you do have to consider that, right? When a doctor says don't do jujitsu because of an MRI in your back, it's not because he thinks you should just stop doing jujitsu and being active and just sit on the couch. It's because he's looking at the forces that are most like, I mean, if you look at jujitsu, let's say somebody, you're inverted, somebody stacks your legs and then twists as they slip into side control. You've just combined compression, flexion, shear, right? All of the forces that cause a disc herniation in your back in one single instance, right? So there is a real need to build capacity towards being able to do that. It's much different than if I had somebody who works a 9 to 5 and likes to go to the gym a couple of times a week and had a back injury than someone who says, I want to go to jiu-jitsu. Your demands are fundamentally different, right? Going to a traditional, kind of rehab, whatever it is, it's probably not going to cut it for you because you have different demands in your body. So yeah, when a doctor tells you stop doing jujitsu, you can absolutely do jujitsu, but you do need to understand what you need to do in order to make that possible, right? So it's kind of take that note and then go figure out what you need to do in order to be able to.
So what's the approach that you're advising on for guys that go through getting nicked up here and there, and then they're ready to go back to training?
Yeah, that's a good question. I get that a lot. I think sometimes people have this idea that it's going to be like, let's say you rehab something for 4 months, and then 4 months in one day you go back to jujitsu, right? It doesn't work like that, right? That's certainly not how that's going to work. I always use the example, if anybody follows professional baseball, the MLB, right? When a guy gets hurt in the MLB, he does a rehab stint. He goes back and he plays in the minor leagues, right? He plays in single A, plays in double A, plays in triple A, and he goes back and then he plays in the professional league, right? You have to have a rehab stint with some of these injuries, right? That can look very different, and that can be challenging because gyms are so different nowadays, right? You have very traditional fundamental schools where you will have the option to go in, just drill some technique, right? You may not even roll. You may have the easy option to say, like, I'm not rolling today. Some gym, my gym has moved pretty much entirely to the CLA approach, which is a little bit different. You're essentially going in, and the first thing you're doing is live, right? There's constraints around it and how much you're going to do of what, but it is live, right? And that's a whole nother conversation because I do think that's helpful for injuries for different reasons, right? I think, if you go 45 minutes of drilling and then 15 minutes of rolling, you're not necessarily warm. But if you've been doing 45 minutes of games that progress up and how much involvement there is, and then you go and roll live, that can actually be very helpful for preventing injuries in that last 15 minutes where you are rolling. But for somebody coming back off of an injury, man, I'll recommend people like take an unnecessarily long amount of time, what feels like an unnecessarily long amount of time, just drill. Tell your instructor, I'm not rolling. I'm just drilling. I need to get used to moving on the mat at a lower level of intensity, right? Gradually ramp that back up. The first day you roll once. Roll with somebody you trust who you can work with a little bit. The next week, roll a couple times, still sit, like obligatorily sit out and build capacity, right? Because when you start to red line, you start to push the limits of what you can do. That's where you end up with re-injury. You want to stay well below that threshold and just bump up where that lives as you get back to training. So depending on the injury, that can take 2 to 8 weeks of just purposefully operating at a lower level than what you're capable of to make sure your body is able to do that again. And I don't necessarily have like a formalized structure around that, but I communicate with my clients on how was it, right? Because if somebody tells me, we were drilling spinal twists and my back killed afterwards, it's like, well, you learned something. You got some information there. So probably not to push the intensity of your training for the next week or two. And then if you drill that same thing again in 2 weeks and you're like, it's better. You've got some more information there. And now you have something to operate off of moving forward.
Yeah. So how do you like that constraint-based training?
Dude, I love it. I know it's somewhat controversial in terms of like, different schools doing things different ways, but I think my learning in jujitsu in the last year and a half since we've done this, I think has been significantly better. Like I'm doing things that I'm a big guy. I'm 6'2", 225. Playing off my back, entering the legs, all that stuff has gotten significantly better over the last year and a half, just from the opportunity to try and fail. Right? You could show me how to do it, right? And we could drill it a couple of times, but like I'm not getting a look at like, okay, how someone's actually going to defend it. So I think my jujitsu has gotten a lot better. I think the classes themselves, they're a better workout. You're working for more of the time that you're in there. And again, that's super dependent on the class, but like, the first situation might be a standing situation. You're just trying to grab an underhook. So it's not crazy involved, but like your heart rate is up. If you're just fighting with somebody trying to grab an underhook for 5 minutes, your heart rate is up. And then you go learn the next one, you do that for an hour. I feel like you get more of a workout, more exercise in that time period. So yeah, I love it.
Yeah, I think the controversy is mainly ego and terminology. I mean, if you think about it, even in traditional schools, they do specific training, and in within specific training, there is constraints. They're just not calling it that. You're starting in
Yeah.
one place and looking for something particular. Just we got a bunch of guys now that are really pushing their version of it and their terminology, and I think that's where
Yeah.
the clash has been primarily.
It's tough too, because like, I still think I think drilling is valuable, right? I think there's things, if I have a question at the end of class, I'll ask my instructor like, "Hey, what can I do better here?" But the thing that I think is different is like, I'm sort of in charge of my own learning, right? Like I know I'm able to identify problems and either figure out a solution or ask very directly, like, "This is the exact problem that I'm having. What can I think about here?" Right? So, it's interesting. I think, we had, Greg Souders come to our gym last month, and he did a whole that guy's amazing. Just listening to him talk, he's like a professor, the way he speaks about everything. But one of the things in the back of my head is like, what will this look like in 30 years? Will we move towards a CLA approach? Will we come to the middle? Will we have schools that have options to learn either way to fit different people and where they're at? I think that's really interesting just in terms of like what will happen in the future. Cause I think I could see it going any number.
Yeah, he's his approach and the way that it's at least being presented is completely valuable in my book. But then
Yeah.
you go to Danaher and it's literally the same thing presented in a different package. I trained with
Yeah.
Danaher. Yeah. I trained with Danaher for a while and it's the same thing. He's really technical. He's really proficient. He does show you specific techniques he wants you to work on and the best route for A, B, and C. But then he lets you play within those three things in that position. And you're just focusing on that offense and defense in those positions. To me, it's the same thing. It's just
Yeah.
presented differently. And, I mean, every professor, I think, should probably have their own little twist, their own little games that they've figured out work for them, the things that are tailor made to play the game that they're playing. And you know what? My professor now, that's one of the things I love. Like if somebody encounters, he does question and answer all the time. Somebody encounters an issue and they'll start talking about it. He go, no, just show me. Show me. I'm a
Yeah.
visual. And once you see somebody's problem, you can address it in so many different ways and you can actually probably stumble upon things that the white belts are teaching you just as much as anybody else is teaching because of the way they approach it and the way they ask the questions. So, I mean, I do. I think it's ego and packaging more than anything else. And, let's see who wins the most championships and they'll always have the higher spot in the totem pole. And that's just the way it works
Yeah.
for now.
Yeah, I never thought of that. The way you put packaging, right? Like, I'm thinking about like even looking at a schedule, right, and seeing like, okay, this is a CLA class versus not, right? Because I think we just started labeling our classes like CLA. I don't think we even had the label on there. But if you just, if you just walked into the gym and started training for the first time, and your introduction to jujitsu was CLA versus, you wouldn't know the difference.
No, yeah.
Right? Unless you had the background of what it should look like, you really wouldn't know. But I think the packaging piece is a good point. Like, how do we actually label it?
I guess the only issues you'd run into is if you were doing like standing constraint based stuff and you get in there for your first class and you're going against a guy who wrestled for 6 years.
Yeah, no, you're right. I think that actually requires a lot from the students to be able to like identify that. Cause like, I train in the morning. Most people that train in the morning, it's usually a smaller group, usually know everybody in there. Right. But if you're in an environment where you don't necessarily, you do have to take those first couple of reps and kind of feel people out, see where they're at. And I can tell when I go with some of the guys at our gym who are higher level, sometimes I can tell like, okay, he's taking it easy today. Right? Or like, no, he's going full bore today. Like I'm going to be in for 60 minutes of like, he's going to be going after it every single rep. Right. So I think like the first couple of reps, you need the ability to kind of feel it out a little bit, which like, needs to be explained or and somehow enforced. But yeah.
I think more midlife guys need to understand that they could probably do a little bit better introspection and seeing which rounds are right for them and which rounds they can just say no to, or just say, you know
Yeah.
what, I'm not training like that today. I got work after this. I've got other things on my mind that are going to take me out of the 100% jujitsu game right now against a kid who's 20 years old, been on the mats forever, and is ready to compete at ADCC.
Yeah, it goes back to I talk about consistency and intensity all the time, right? Like consistency is what most people need. Most people chase intensity. And that's true outside of jujitsu. That's true for trying to lose weight. That's true for, many different things in life. You think intensity is the thing that you need. You need to wake up at 5 a.m. every single day and, push, push, push. But it's just the consistency. Right? If you can operate at a 7 out of 10 every single day, 365 days a year, that's going to beat operating at a, a 10, a 4, a 6, and then kind of bouncing around like that. So that example, right, taking that round off or whatever, if that's allowing you to continue to train and learn, a year from now, you're not going to need to take that round off because you were able to be consistent and build that capacity over time. That's a huge piece, I think.
Yeah. So, all right. So, a little bit outside your wheelhouse, what works for you? And not that you're going to be sharing it professionally, but sharing it with the audience right now, as far as your lifestyle, your sleep. How do you support being on the
Yeah.
mat?
Yeah, you know what, man? That's a good question because I do have like my own kind of I have what I call a health checklist. Things that I'm trying to do every single day. There's 6 items on there. I want to ideally get 4 of them, right? If I can get 4 out of the 6, I feel pretty good with that. 10 steps a day, right? And I'm pretty strict on that one. Like sometimes I think about like I use my phone, right? If I'm doing jujitsu, I'm probably getting a bunch of steps in, but I want to make sure it's actually showing on the phone as 10,000. So that gets me outside. That gets me walking. That's good for recovery. That's good, my back, right? Walking is flat out one of the best things you can do for a back injury. That's a big one for me. Diet wise, I focus on a protein, at least 200 grams of protein. I try to minimize how much of that is, a powder, right? I have the protein powder, but I just think like technically if it's a powder, it's processed, right? They had some type of process to make that. So I'd like as little of my protein source as possible to be a powder, but it's great for actually hitting that number for on a time crunch, whatever it is, you can shake it up and drink it. That's something that's on there. Eat 8 different vegetables a day. This is one I learned a long time ago. That one is challenging. It forces you to eat certain foods, right? You have to include certain, vegetables and different things in your diet. And I know a lot of people now are doing like the carnivore and all that stuff. I have to think vegetables are I don't think you need to eat only vegetables, right? But I have to think somehow there's some health benefits to, different kinds of vegetables, getting different colors in your diet, all that kind of stuff. Some of the fermented stuff, all that stuff. I try and eat 8 different vegetables a day. This has been a big one for my sleep lately, but no phone in my bedroom. My wife bought an old school alarm clock, so I don't have to have my phone as the alarm clock. My phone stays in here in the gym in my office. It does not come into my bedroom. That's actually been a huge one for my sleep. Other ones on there, no weed, no booze, right? I want as many days a week as possible without marijuana, alcohol, anything like that. Pretty straightforward one, but you're not recovering the same if you're doing those things. It's just about you're not waking up. Even, people will do at least in Boston, you can buy edibles at any street in Boston at these dispensaries, and you start taking them to help with sleep at night, and it helps you fall asleep faster. But you start to realize that you're waking up like 10% groggier, and then you're reliant, and then you need it every single day, and it starts to become something that you're using more like coffee at night than you are as like to really relax. So try to do that stuff as little as possible. I think that's 5. What am I missing?
Yeah. While you do it, it affects your REM sleep as well.
Yeah,
I smoked weed for a long time. I was a marijuana advocate. I grew weed. I was really all about it for a long, long time.
I think that's an interesting one, in terms of age, right? I'm 30, you're 47. I think a lot of people my age are starting to realize that too. Like a lot of my friends through their 20s, like it's kind of end of the day. You came home, you did like a little edible just to help wind down and fall asleep, but it's not really helping you long term, right? You're not really doing the things to get proper sleep and recover. But the last one on my list is meditate. And that's something I know you talked about Wim Hof and all that stuff. I used to do some of that, the Wim Hof and all that stuff. I've really fallen back to just 15 minutes. I have an app on my phone. It's called Insight Timer. And it just plays like beach waves crashing on the beach. And I just lie down and chill. And that's been a really big shift for me in the sense that like, a lot of times we try to like, create intensity and create like psych ourselves up a little bit, but taking something that moves you in the other direction where it's really just 15 minutes to just like chill out, focus on your breathing. Those are things that have worked well for me.
Yeah. So is that frequency based? Does it play specific frequencies for you to chill out, or is it just nice
I
white
think
noise?
it's just nice, like, oh, sorry. I think that's just nice, like beach music. It's a wave, kind of crashing over and over like you're on a beach. I know there's different frequencies you can do, and you can do like, somebody talking you through something. I like just the beach waves crashing, lie down for 15 minutes on the couch. That seems to work best for me.
Awesome.
Yeah.
All right. Give me a word today you want to leave the people with. I think, I mean, I think I already know what it is, but let's see.
I would say consistency. I feel like that's a lot.
Ding.
Yeah, I think like that's a big concept with me is like, one of your first questions, and I didn't necessarily think you were going to go that way, was like, with the option for surgery, like, do you think there's a shift happening and do you think there's better options? I didn't expect you were necessarily going to go that route. But yeah, and I think consistency is a big part of that, right? Like just being able to be consistent with something for a long period of time. There's that expression, we underestimate or we overestimate what we can accomplish in a day. We underestimate what we can accomplish in a year. Right. It's so true. And with some of these injuries, I work with people who have very serious injuries. Right. Like that's a lot of, disc injuries, ACL tears, things like that. You underestimate what you can get done if you're consistent 2, 3 times a week for a year. So I think that would be the word I would leave the people with.
Yeah, that's mine as well. It was the word in the last podcast I recorded, and the more I've done this, the more I realize people that have really experienced success, personal success, or people that have stuck with something long enough to know how to stick with it, is consistency over intensity every time. And yeah, the message is strong, brother. It resonates for sure.
Yeah, man. It's great talking to you. I feel like our values are very aligned. I'm going to be continuing to listen to your podcast. I appreciate all the stuff that you're doing and putting out there. You've thought this through very well. So it was good to talk to you today and get a feel for what you're doing as well.
I appreciate it, bro. I appreciate your time and who you're working with. You're supporting the community that I admire the most, that I respect the most, and that I really feel like needs to be grown. Like there needs to be more people on the mats because no matter where you come from, it's going to produce something in your life that's positive and has some kind of ripple effect, in my opinion.
Yep, absolutely.
DrEvan.org is this man's website. And give me your handle on Instagram one more time.
It's just Dr. Evan Kappler, one word.
Dr. Evan Kappler on Instagram. I'll have everything in the show notes. Get on. He's got a free call. Free call. I mean, you have nothing to lose. You're going through something. Get on the phone. Let him take a listen. Let him take a look. See what he can offer you guys. I'm sure his success stories on Instagram will motivate you even more. Go there, check him out, and he's got some great content too. So again, I appreciate your time. I appreciate you being here and who you're working for. Maybe we'll do this again sometime.
Yeah, man. Thank you very much, Josh.
And we'll train at some point, I bet.
Yes.
All right. You guys have a good day.